So good afternoon and lovely to see you all. I think few of them have already attended my previous sessions, and it's been almost 7 months after which I am back. So it feels really nice to seeing all of you here. So let me start sharing my presentation. Yeah. I think all of us can see the slides, right?
Yes, Madhuri, we can.
Yeah, okay. Great. So today we are discussing about the most common challenge that every parent goes through is how to handle tantrums. For a young child, especially, it often do we see that they may break down and they start crying if things don't go their way. Yeah. So, we are going to talk about it and see how we can regulate our children's tantrums and meltdown. And of course, we all have experienced these situations in our lives. So, let's understand whether tantrum and meltdown are same. Because in both the situations, we'll see the child is screaming, kicking, hitting, biting, you know, um, throwing things. So you will see a lot of stuffs in common, but are they actually the same? So they are not. If you will see tantrum is primarily purposeful. The child exactly knows what they are doing. It's driven by a want, or something that they really want to get. And sometimes it can also happen when they see that the people around them are not giving enough attention, and to seek attention you can see children start crying, yelling, screaming, or sometimes it's just stays for a while. When they see that their expectations are met, the tantrums fade away. On the other hand, meltdown is not something that is purposeful. There is no purpose. The child is overwhelmed by, environmental stimuli. So if there is sensory stimuli, or there is too much of outdoor input given to the child, that is when, for example, if there is a loud noise, or children have gone to the park and there is too much of crowd, that can also throw off a child, and that is when the meltdown starts. What is interesting is meltdowns usually happen with children who are in the spectrum of autism, and we kind of use the word for regular tantrums also, which should not be used, because meltdown is where children are inconsolable. It's difficult to calm them down, because it's not driven by any need or any requirement. It's just coming because their emotions are taken over by their rational thinking. So it's very difficult, and an external intervention of a loved one is necessary in the case of meltdowns. Now let's understand what are the causes and triggers that brings in this tantrum or meltdowns. But before we understand this, let's understand the brain. What is this brain? What happens? So we have this famous neurobiologist, Dan Siegel. He's also the author of The Whole Brain Child. And he uses his hand model to explain what this brain is. So suppose this is the hand and the thumb. Let's put this thumb onto the palm. Now this part of the brain is called amygdala. Yeah. And if we close the thumb using these four fingers, this part is called prefrontal cortex. Now, the amygdala is actually and a collection of evolutionary memory from last 300 billion years. So it basic job of amygdala is to react to threat, danger, fear, all the emotional responses that helps you survive. So the moment amygdala takes over, we are in the fight or flight mode. And this part of the brain, the one that covers the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, is our rational mind. The mind which is used to problem solve, to understand right over wrong, or to have critical or analytical thinking. All that is accessed using this prefrontal cortex. Now, prefrontal cortex actually develops only by the time an individual is in their mid 20s. So, a child who is as young as 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years old, they do not have this prefrontal cortex developed yet. And every time they feel a threat, their amygdala, the evolutionary or survival brain, is acting upon. And that is why the reaction comes in intensity. So when are these, tantrums that you may observe in young children is when they are either hungry or fatigued, or many a times even in transition between two events. For example, the child is playing in the park and you have to take the child home. You will see the tantrum there for sure. I'm sure everybody would have experienced, including me. So there, or if the child is busy playing at home and you are taking the child to the toilet, or you are forcing the child to eat, all those transition situations are where you will observe this tantrum or meltdown in children. Also, you will see when there is a sensory overload, when there is a lot of noise the child is not comfortable with, or new people coming in the child is not comfortable with, that can also trigger their tantrums or meltdowns. And these young children still do not know how to express themselves using words. So, when they cannot use words, they find it very challenging to express themselves, and that is when they feel frustrated. And when they are frustrated, it also comes in the form of tantrums. So let's understand these emotions in detail and what are the developmental reasons. So as I already discussed that children are still developing their rational mind. So the amygdala is working when children are under any kind of emotional trigger. So this is absolutely developmentally normal for children to show tantrums, right? So let's understand an emotion, how this child gets frustrated when they feel obstacles, when they face obstacle, and when they think that they are unable to take control of their environment. For example, if there is a space which is overcrowded with furniture and the child is finding it very difficult to maneuver through those furnitures, and he's having some toy in his hand, and he's struggling because the toys are heavy, so managing both walking and holding the toy in the hand, he may be finding it very challenging, and that is where the frustration starts and it can cause tantrums or meltdown. Anger or disappointment. So many a times that, or in fact, in various situations we'll see when their desires are thwarted, when their autonomy is restricted, when they are asked to not do a thing that they are really invested in, that is when you will see that you have angered them or made them disappointed, and then again you can see the tantrums coming into existence. Sometimes children, though children cannot express themselves all the time, but definitely they feel misunderstood when we are not able to understand what they are trying to communicate. That can also cause a lot of anger and disappointment in children. Now, as we discussed earlier, also the excessive stimuli or sensory input, that all can cause overwhelm in children, and it's hard. You will mostly see these, stimuli affected overwhelm in children who are again in the spectrum of autism, and it causes a lot of meltdown. So we have to be very careful of the environment that we are offering to these kind of children. This picture I wanted to put because this recently happened with me. I met my nephew for the first time, and uh, I think this was our first day of the trip. I think first day of our visit itself, we went out together, and you will see that he is putting his hands out, reaching out to his parents because. Even though we used to have video calls, he had never met me personally and he didn't feel safe with me. So, this tantrum or meltdown can also occur because of the fear and anxiety of a new environment or, unfamiliar faces. I was unfamiliar for him, a stranger for him, and it caused him a lot of, disturbance. I remember how he was not even looking at me after this picture. So, yeah, this is one of the situations. Now, also let's understand that there will be signs and stages. Okay. um, but what will happen is it will vary with each child. These signs are going to vary, but there will be a typical pattern. So what are the signs that we can observe? We'll see that there will be intensified emotional exhaustion in terms of whether they are frustrated or sad. They are sitting in a corner, they are withdrawn, they are not engaged with us, they are unwilling to cooperate with us. If they have verbal communication, they may right away say go away or no or stop. They will have physical expression in terms of either biting or hitting or sometimes just screaming and yelling. So these are the signs that tells us that the initial stages or the trigger for the tantrum has begun. Now escalation stage is where this trigger can give this outburst of emotions, and you will see that though their behaviors escalate, they escalate to an extent that their rationality is decreased because their emotional intensity has heightened. They are very, very sensitive to external stimuli. um, you will see that anything, even if we are sitting right next to the child, that also can cause frustration or anger, and the meltdown can happen. Then they reach the peak stage. Peak stage is where everything is heightened. They lose their self control. They are persistent about things that they want, or whatever emotion that they are feeling, they are absolutely persistent about it, and they do not want anything in the environment. Nothing pleases them. Yeah. And then comes the de-escalation stage. So de-escalation stage is, by this time they are emotionally exhausted and they are looking for comfort. So as an adult who is loving, and as parents who are really invested in the best interest of our children, we have to comfort them physically. Sometimes when we are talking to the child may not work, so our sensory input in the form of hugging, cuddling, all that is going to reassure the child that we are there for them. We are there to safeguard their interest for their safety and security, and that slowly calms them down, and that is when they are okay enough to start to communicate. um, so we understood the signs and stages, but what is interesting is that uh, at that point when the child has started throwing tantrums or has a meltdown, it's difficult to understand what to do. We are also equally overwhelmed, and that is where we might make certain mistakes as parents. So what are those mistakes that we must be very, very conscious of and try not to, try to avoid it? So first one is right away invalidate what the child is feeling, or just laugh at the child or dismiss whatever the child is expressing. Many a times, when we are sitting with our friends, you will see that the child has started crying, and we'll be like, oh yeah, it should be normal. It may be normal for us, but for not for the child, because it will aggravate their emotions. It's In no way it's telling the child that I'm really interested in understanding what you feel. Instead, it's saying, I don't care what you feel. So we have to be careful about that. The other mistake that we may do is try to stop emotions quickly. So the child starts crying or throwing things. We just want to go and correct them right away. That's not going to happen because, as I said, it's the amygdala, the survival brain that is working. The more we're trying to push the child, the more we are trying to stop the child, the more the child is getting into fight and flight mode, and the more the child's emotion heightens. So it's not going to help in any way. Again, if we are aiming to reason and teach the child when the child is still emotional, for example, the child is crying because the friend who was playing with him just left, and it was night time and they had to sleep, say, for example. Now we start reasoning with the child, saying, it is night time and your friend had to leave. It's not going to help in making the child understand, because he is not ready for it. It's going to stunt their emotional development, because we, instead of acknowledging what the child is feeling, we are just busy in preaching, and preaching at wrong time is not going to work. Imagine you are upset and somebody is coming and trying to give you some sort of gyan. Are you ready for it? Unless and until you are not ready for it, it's not going to sit with you. There is another mistake where, we only connect emotionally, where we are kind of cuddling, hugging, and soothing the child down, but we are not eventually reasoning out with the child why it happened. Right? Once the child calms down, it is important for us to sit with the child and talk about it, talk about what happened, not necessarily in the form of a preaching or a lesson, but in the form of discussing that event and what might have occurred. This will help the child understand and prepare himself for next episode if it repeats. So it's important to not just connect, but also reason things out, but only when the child is ready. Okay, this is one of the most common things people think: timeout. Timeout is the best way to, regulate the child's emotions, but it is absolutely not. Timeout is basically asking the child to sit and reflect on what they did. Now, imagine you were in a group and you did something so that someone, maybe the head of the group or somebody, asked you to go sit in a corner and just sit and think what you did. Are you going to think nice about yourself? Will you be feeling proud about why you were asked to sit alone? Definitely not. I wouldn't have, right? So if you are giving these kind of timeouts to your children, do you think they'll be feeling proud about themselves? Do you think it's going to help boost their confidence or their self-esteem? Definitely not. So giving them timeouts is not going to work. Instead, it's just going to make them feel even worse about themselves. Though these young children cannot express themselves sometimes using words, but they definitely emotionally understand what happened to them. So timeouts is not going to help there. So what are the prevention strategies we must, offer to these children? We need to establish and maintain a consistent routine. When I'm saying consistent, means every day the same thing should happen around the same time. I'm not saying exact same time, I'm saying around the same time. There should be an order and it should be maintained consistently.
बड़े वेबिनार अटेंड कर रहे हैं.
Excuse me, can you mute yourself, please? Yeah, thank you. So, if we have a consistent routine for our children, it gives a sense of security, because child already knows what's going to happen next. And when they are prepared for what's coming, it becomes easy for them to navigate through their, daily life. Offer them clear choices. Always have, options to choose between for young children, because they are still not regulated to make choices by themselves, and especially if they have plenty of options around them. So not more than 2 to 3 options should be given to them at one time. So say for example, a child, we are planning to go to the park. So the child is running straight away inside the park. We have to sit down to the child's level and talk to them, give them choices. Are you going to slide, or do you want to sit on the swing? This way, the child's energy is channelized. Now, the child is exactly clear what he wants to do. At the same time, because the child chose what he wants to do at that point of time, it also gives him a sense of autonomy. Teach effective communication. So when we are talking to each other, with our children, we are giving them words, and that word will help them express themselves when they are in need. So for example, if the child is sliding in the park and is not able to control his movement, he may call out saying help. So help is just an effective word for him to communicate when he feels he's in danger. The other preventive strategy would be to create stimulating environment. Not just having an order and a routine in the environment, even stimulating environment is equally important. But what is stimulating environment? Stimulating environment means the child should have enough opportunity to participate in day-to-day life. So if you will see the picture, the child is dusting, putting clothes in laundry, mopping the floor, or putting food in the compost, and arranging the groceries and fruits and vegetables, washing their own plates after eating. So all these activities will engage them and also center their energy. They will be more focused. So give them enough stimulating environment for children to be centered and grounded in their emotions. It gives them enough opportunity to exert their physical and emotional energy. And most importantly, we need to recognize the early warning signs. For example, a child falls down, we know what's going to happen next, right? So we should be prepared for that. And now we know that there are stages. So before those stages occur, we should already start into getting into the child's level, talk to the child and calm them down before it, aggravates and takes into the peak stage. Encourage emotional regulation. Now, when we are talking about emotional regulation, we must understand that the child is still learning. The child is brand new in this world, and the child doesn't know anything about this world. We are the ones who are going to, help them understand their emotions, help them understand and navigate through their, through this world, through their surroundings. So, what can be done? We need to talk to the child. We need to make the child feel safe, yes. But how? By, saying, I'm here. I'm going to help you. I'm going to, take care of you. If the child is not really ready to listen to us, we need to just sit down and wait for the child to calm down. The way we regulate ourselves is what the child is observing, and that will help the child also to regulate their emotions. And that is called co-regulation. We are co-regulating. We are, through our own control of emotions, we are also helping the child. Having said this, when we are sitting next to the child, doesn't mean we just get back into onto our phones and start watching or texting somebody else. When we are sitting with our child, when the child is having a meltdown or throwing a tantrum, we need to be completely present for our child. Even though we are not communicating, we must be completely present for our child. Unless and until we are not present, see, the child needs to know that this person is my best friend. This person is doing everything for the better of me. This person is there for my safety. If you are busy in yourself while the child is having a breakdown, it's not going to communicate to the child that you really, you really are concerned about the child. right? So be present completely for your child. Be there, watch them, have a peaceful smile. Just don't talk unless and until they are ready. Once they slowly calm down, hug them and then talk to them. Now, how to teach effective communication? As I mentioned earlier, we need to give them words like help. When two people are working together, we need to, tell them, "Can I have a turn?" So now the child has picked up a word, turn. So each time we are having my turn, your turn. So it's turn, right? So this way we are helping the child pick up keywords. I'm talking about children who are still to develop language, but for older children, definitely they can use the entire, sentence to communicate, saying, "Can I have a turn? Your turn is over now. It's my turn." So this way, the child is able to regulate their actions as well along with us. If the child is over exhausted by the activity that they have been doing, they can definitely say, "I need a break." Similarly, we can the child can talk about what kind of emotion he's going through, and many other aspects. Not just one emotion. There are multiple emotions, and all that can happen when we are talking to the child. So, if the child is angry because we did not allow them to go out and play, and the child starts crying, we sit and then we make an eye contact. We become kind. We talk very softly, saying, "I know you are very upset. I know you are upset because you couldn't go out, right? That's all right. I understand that emotion, but right now we have to have our breakfast or we have to have our lunch, right?" So what we did was we understood their emotion, we accepted that emotion. It's always important to accept the child's emotions, not behavior, just the emotion. If we are not accepting the emotions, that will trigger their, tantrums even further. In the house, the child must know that it is always okay to express themselves, and that is what will help in their emotional development. If some of the emotions, like the negative emotions, as we look at it, like crying or screaming or throwing, all these emotions we generally do not approve of, and if it is not accepted, it is going to stunt their emotional development. So we have to accept those emotions, but not the behavior. Throwing is not allowed. We have to set that boundary. But the child is frustrated is why he's throwing the object. That should be understood. And that is when the child will be able to regulate themselves. Okay. So we need to give some calming techniques to the children when they are getting into meltdowns or tantrums. One of the best ways is to help them take deep breathing. For toddlers who are below 3 years, deep breathing may not be possible, so we can ask them to count. And it worked with me also when I was working with children. If we start counting with them, saying, "Let's count one," and what I used to do was I'll just take them out in the area where we have a lot of flowers or plants, and I will start counting 1 rose, 2 rows, 3 rows, and it worked beautifully because by that time the child's focus has changed into counting, and it just brought their energy down and yeah, help them regulate themselves. um, Progressive muscle relaxation, so they can just sit or lie down in the shavasana pose and all. Then going to a calm down place. So many a times at home, especially if you have other children or other family members, which can be a trigger for them, maybe you can take your child to another room. You can go with your child to another room, and there you can sit. You can make the child sit next to you, read a book, or again you can have counting game, or just deep breathing with the child. Model how to deep breathe and let the child observe you. All that is going to help them calm down. With older children, even coping statements like, "I'm fine, I'm going to get better, I think I did this well," all these language, all these sentences are going to help them regulate themselves, control their emotions, and bring their intensified emotions to a level where they are able to calm down. The other thing is positive opposite techniques. So, positive opposite technique is one of the aspects of positive discipline. It's very interesting. Uh, I have mentioned here what you want to see instead of don't want to see. So, in this animation, if you see the kid is jumping, generally our first response would be don't jump, sit down, right? The first one is don't. And again, when we say don't means no, and the amygdala says, oh, it's threat, it's against my expectation, it's against my wish, danger, and they will do it more. So instead of that, we need to use a language that's going to help in making them do what we want. So instead of that, if we say, come sit next to me, and then acknowledge that they listen to us by saying, thank you, thank you for sitting next to me, right? So these kind of affirmative language is going to help the child direct themselves. These will help them in not throwing tantrum more, right? So we have to understand the triggers. We have to understand how has it occurred, and then use a language that's going to redirect them rather than aggravate it even further. So we can do all these things only if we are really sensitive and observing of our own emotions. We cannot help the child if we are not helping ourselves, right? So, self reflection is important. Being mindful of what we are going through. Most of the time, as I mentioned earlier, also, if the child starts throwing tantrum, and especially if it is in public, the first emotion that we feel is, oh my God, it's so humiliating. The child started throwing tantrums and being stubborn in front of everyone. What do I do? And that is when we usually neglect our child's emotions, isn't it? Either we just carry the child forcefully and take them away or drag them away rather than sitting down to their level and talking to them. So we have to be very mindful of what emotions we are feeling when our child started throwing tantrum or meltdown. So reflect on it, and then many a times it's not possible, especially if you have a lot of work, you are multitasking, and then suddenly your child also starts throwing tantrum, or you have just come back from work, and having a peaceful instead of having a peaceful moment with your family members, the child starts to throw tantrum. It's difficult. We all understand that, we all go through it. It's difficult to control our emotions those times. But you know what? It's always good to take a pause. Pause for a few seconds. Just sit, take a deep breath, and then start over. Children, when they are throwing tantrum, it must be understood, as I said, it is developmentally normal, but also most of the time, these tantrums are never a cause of emergency. So we can take some pause, and then we can get to the child and then speak to the child rather than jumping into the situation and then behaving in a way which we may later regret, right? So instead of getting involved and being impulsive, it's better to calm down our own energy and then get into the situation. We must ourselves model healthy coping strategies. It's very important to model our own coping strategies, because if the children do not see us, how will they learn? So, breathing and deep breathing and counting. Many a times, I myself sit alone and I'm talking to myself, and thinking about what I did. And in those situations, what I do, the best for me is when I'm writing it down. So this can be your own coping strategy also. What happened? What did I do? And what could I have done? So if we can write it down and break things, we automatically start understanding our own emotions. And when we understand our emotions, we can work on it. Nobody is perfect. We all are, at different levels, but no one is perfect. And it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine to be where you are, because we all love our children and we are trying our best. If you are attending this session, it means that you are really invested in your child. You really want to help the child. So it's okay if we are losing our cool, but what is important is to know how to cope with it and how we are going to work the next time when we are around our children in such situations. And we have our pioneer of positive discipline, Dr. Jane Nelson. She always mentioned connect before correct. So we need to first make connection with our children before we are trying to correct them, because unless and until there is no emotional, connect between two people, we are not open to listen to anyone. So always try to connect before we are trying to correct our children. Also, we need to know our own triggers. We need to be aware of what causes us to, get frustrated. As I said, writing down is the best way we can learn and understand ourselves also, because many a times when we are sitting and reflecting at that moment, we will be knowing, we would be definitely knowing about it. But when we write it down, it's easy to go and, read through. And that's what I do. So every time I go and read, and it's not necessarily I'm going and reading it every day or every month, it can be any time when we feel like, right? But if it is already written, we know where we were and from there where we are. And when we are able to gauge it, it becomes easier for us to navigate through in such challenging situations. So always try to self-reflect and understand about what can be your trigger point. Once we know how to connect with our children before we can correct, right? So that's about it. I'm really looking forward to all of you working with your children, understanding their different stages, and be aware, be planned, because we already, if you know the signs, it becomes easy for you to, help the children before getting into those stages. So I'm looking forward to all of you, trying your best, supporting your children in such situations.